Curtis, we're here today to talk about blending human and machine to craft strategy beyond the data set. You've got a really strong background and obviously qualifications in data science, software. As we tell all of our clients, mate, you should be working for NASA or SpaceX, a brain the size of a planet. It's life has changed, especially over the last 10 years, but as we're seeing every month, there's more advancements in data science and AI. What are you seeing out there, mate?
Yes, I suppose we count ourselves as very lucky to be at the forefront of this. Obviously, it's a very quickly developing sort of sector, and every day there's new developments in terms of technical capability, but also I think a maturation of our understanding of how to apply some of these tools. So, just quickly on my background, it sort of intersects between software engineering, data analysis, and business analysis. So we sort of get that almost triple thread of like, well, we can do the technical side and we can understand, I guess, what the data is telling us. But what's really important, what I'd love to talk about today, is the exactly that, how we blend in that human side. So how does it work in the business? How does the human intelligence, how does the human factor impact on all of that sort of very technical stuff that we do, and also make it much more effective at the end of the day?
Yeah, certainly. And businesses that we talk to and even individuals we talk to are still trying to get their head around, how does this all work? Yeah, especially as businesses are transitioning and having to adopt more data strategies, more AI strategies, and what it means to their business. Um, what are some of the questions that your clients and businesses are asking you around? Well, how does this work?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's just a bit of confusion around just how quickly things are changing. So it feels like every day we're getting a new AI tool sort of shoved down our throats, or implemented a new tool that we already use. And first and foremost, just that change management is a really, really big piece that I think is almost underweighted in a lot of organizations, unfortunately. But in terms of the direct questions around how this is going to change our business is probably where we're seeing most of the concern, or the concern and optimism, I think. A lot of people are very excited about how this rapidly developing environment is going to change the way that business works. Potentially they don't need to invest so much in what is very much seen as boring or mundane tasks, and we can sort of help automate that out of the business and redeploy those resources into something much more valuable, which is where we start to see this, again, blending of that human and machine to craft a better strategy. So no longer does our strategy need to be, how do we get the most out of our workforce, like say in a factory environment where we're just pushing and pushing and pushing. Well, there's probably smarter ways to do that. Can we deploy automation in certain ways to reduce that, again, mundane tasks, and then redeploy those resources elsewhere to basically benefit the business, obviously. I think where this all sort of starts for us is taking it right back to bare bones. We talk about data analysis. So we've had the pleasure of doing this for almost a decade now. And I think throughout that time, there's been, again, that real maturation around the fact that data analysis can't just be looking at numbers. And it sounds kind of strange to think about, but when you really look at what's most important, it's the decision making that comes from that data, right? And none of these decisions should be or are ever really made in a vacuum. They should rely on a really deep understanding of that customer behavior, the context behind the analysis, even things like cultural nuance when you're talking about a multinational organization, for example. All these things really, really need to steer what we're doing with the technology. There's a really great framework called Jobs to be Done. It's just one of them, but is a very good one in my view. And it really speaks to understanding the why behind customer actions. And that's what we try to use in all of our data-driven decision making. So great example of that is we do quite a bit of work with the not-for-profit sector, actually, which is very rewarding. But for them, obviously, donations are a big piece of the financial outcome of the organization. And for them, we were able to work with them to understand why people are leaving a donation. And as you can imagine, there's very many sort of motivations behind that. But one of the really key jobs that we discovered that these people were hiring the organization for was essentially to build their own legacy, right? So someone who may be a little bit disconnected from their community, but has the financial means to donate, they want to develop their own legacy through these donations. And so then by understanding that, we could identify those people in using our data analysis capability, and then the marketing team could execute on that, leading to a more targeted campaign that increased the donation rate, but also actually increase the outcome for the supporter. So they feel more connected to the cause and actually achieve the job they're trying to do, which is build their own legacy, right? And that's just one example of, I guess, a multitude of different ways that we can use this understanding of our customer, understanding of the human side of the data to further to develop our understanding of what the data is telling us and make sure that we make the right decision, not just what we think is the right decision based off out of context numbers, if that makes sense.
That's really interesting, because then you think about the human factors there, and I guess also people's need to believe and belong in something as well. Um, and that's obviously very powerful. I mean, I wonder what used to happen 20 years ago, before for-purpose or not-for-profit organisations had access to systems and people like yourself and like Baxter to be able to understand what's driving, what are the emotive drivers for people, why people actually want to donate. Was it just like send out, send out an envelope with a letter in it, and hoping that people donate?
Yeah, I mean, from a technical capability, right, there just probably wasn't as much, there definitely wasn't as much as what we could do right now in terms of segmentation and targeting and coordinating mail outs and emails and so on. But I think also that's potentially where we've gotten a little lost in this sort of infatuation with big data and all that sort of stuff, is it's still, again, really centered in that human element. So back then, you probably had a fundraising manager who knew all of their core high value donors and could actually remember them by name or have a chat with them and develop that human connection. And I always say to our clients that if nothing else, if you can't afford to go and do a data analysis program or get an analyst on board or engage with us, whatever it may be, the single most powerful thing you can do is spend more time speaking with customers and understanding what their problems are. And that alone provides so much useful context that then when you do go down the path of analyzing and collecting that data and doing all the wonderful things you can do with that, you have that context. It's much more implementable. It's accounting for some of those real world constraints that your customers are seeing from your organization. It just makes everything really so much more powerful.
It's interesting. Obviously, this morning, the conclave elected a new pope, Pope Leo, and there was some information that came out in the local news today about the dire financial situation the Vatican's in. And you talk about giving and people's desire to give and why they give, and there's a drop off in numbers in people going to church, or people believing believing in the Roman Catholicism as an example. So, and the people are donating less. It's rather interesting though, but especially those older forms of donation, like money in the plate. People walking around money in the plate. Well, where does that money go? Like, there's no feedback to the customer really where it goes. Lotteries as an example. They might.
It's a very interesting space. Lots of different motivations in there. Specifically, it's sort of a very interesting combination of factors that drive someone to gamble, right? Essentially, but to do it with social purpose as well. I think again, it comes back to whether it is a lottery program or e-commerce or logistics. It's really around understanding what are those core metrics that make sense, but actually connect back to the value that your organization generates. So it's all good and well to track all these vanity metrics like, oh, we got 10,000 people to view our website last week. Okay, but it was that
What does it mean?
value traffic? Yeah, exactly. Is that a good number? Is that a bad number? If it goes up or down, what does it mean for your organization? Um, it, I think it's in such an information rich environment. We need to be careful to not overwhelm ourselves with just numbers on numbers on numbers and focus on what really matters. And again, that's where it comes back to setting a really good strategy around, I guess, like your data strategy first and foremost, but also how that ties back to your business strategy as well. I think there should be two separate documents, but be very closely related, because there's no getting away from the fact that in 2025 and beyond, every organization is a digital organization, really. Whether you're on the tools and building fences, you're still booking, you're doing your invoicing, all that sort of stuff is just unavoidably digital now. So we need to build out our organizations to sort of wrap around that and embrace that fact. Really interesting example in some of that sort of on the tools space as well, I think, is in like logistics route optimization, right? So we're trying to deliver all these parcels in the most efficient way possible without burning up our tires, without chewing up fuel. This is, I guess, there's been a lot of developments on the technical side in the last few years. We have really good optimizers that can take into account like real life traffic and all that sort of stuff from Google Maps and sort of reroute drivers again to meet that optimization goal. But I think what's still missing is that feedback loop from the drivers. So you look at a London taxi driver, they don't use Google Maps. They just know where roads are going to get congested, or they know, I guess, for repeat clients that they get from certain districts, like what their preferences are, where they want to get dropped off, where there may be a pothole in the road that negatively impacts the experience. None of that sort of stuff I feel has been very well taken account in some of these very math-driven optimizations that, again, they do deliver fantastic financial outcomes, but the next step is going to be that connection from that sort of human intelligence from the person on the ground back into that feedback loop of a very fancy mathematical model to generate these insights. I think that is the next big sort of frontier that we're going to see in this space.
So Curtis, given that this is the new frontier, what inroads are you seeing and what developments in industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, to be perfectly frank, like it's pretty immature. I don't think many organizations are making very serious inroads. Again, that's partly driven by the fact that businesses are busy. They're busy doing business, right? But also it's such a quickly developing area, but also coupled with the fact that there's so much focus on the shiny tools rather than the connection from that intelligence and back to your strategy and how it informs your strategy and vice versa. I think we certainly see there's a lot of opportunity around that space in terms of connecting those different forms of intelligence back into the strategy and helping that, using that to help drive the strategy throughout the organization. And I think we'll have a bit more to say on that a bit sooner, but it's certainly, in my mind, is the next frontier in terms of how we push a strategy to be more effective amongst what is becoming a increasingly chaotic, increasingly fast-moving, increasingly multinational sort of trade environment that we're in. And I was really excited about the prospect of what we're able to do by bringing in this massive form of new intelligence with 7 or 8 billion points of intelligence, you always say. It's very, very exciting.
So, mate, what do you see as some of the challenges and I guess best practices in integrating, human insights with AI in strategy development?
Yeah, well, I think the first one that we always talk about with clients when it comes to data analysis is like, well, how do we get that information in a structured format? We can't analyze pieces of paper that are scattered across your desk, right? It's just not possible. But that is sort of rapidly changing with the introduction of AI and the capabilities of it to extract structured information from unstructured. I think that's still a developing space. Certainly, again, massive inroads in that space, but it's not fully mature. But what that will let us do is actually make sense of this human intelligence at a scale that actually makes it financially viable. Because otherwise, what are you doing? You're employing people potentially to rifle through market releases and so on to make sense of it and to translate that into value for your organization. It's just really not viable at most scales unless you're talking investment banking or those sorts of things. But yeah, certainly with the release of more higher and higher capability AI models, I think that will rapidly shift, and we'll be able to sort of bridge that gap between the human and sort of soft intelligence that sits over here and the hard number crunching that we're all getting pretty good at the moment, to really transform the way that we think about developing strategy and driving strategy, more importantly, throughout the organization, rather than just having it sit at like the CSO and CXO levels. I think that's where the value is going to be really realized, is the connection right through the entire organization that is only made possible through the use of AI.
So mate, when we talk about organizations, I mean, this isn't just for medium or listed companies, right? Like small businesses should also be adopting and embracing AI and also obviously strategy. A lot of small businesses don't necessarily have a strategy, but it's easy enough to obviously implement if they've got the right advice and the right guidance. But I guess also, if I was a small business owner, I'd be thinking, geez, this sounds expensive. There's too many barriers for me. Is that the case?
Yeah, look, it's always a matter of what's it worth to the business, right? There's no doubt there's costs involved, but I think the beauty again of what we're able to do with AI in this space is employing an AI model is a hell of a lot cheaper than employing a team of 10 analysts to rifle through essentially what is low value information, trying to find that golden nugget. It's, I think potentially if we talk just dollar figure, it's probably not as expensive as most people would think. It's certainly going to be very high return, and that's the most important thing. So as long as you can bootstrap it for a couple of months and get over that sort of initial hump or the trepidation around a dollar figure, which again I think is not really that high, but it will certainly return multitude of your investment back to the business if you're able to connect that strategy back through the entire organization and drive forward what you're trying to achieve with your organization. And that's at the end of the day why everyone goes into business, is to drive their business forward, right? So I think it's a developing space, but the developments I think are going to come very, very quickly. And if you're not sort of at the leading edge, you're going to fall behind very, very quickly, because we'll rapidly see organizations embrace this very well, and then that'll be their next big leap forward.
So I guess the question then is, instead of can I afford to do it, can I afford not to do it?
Yeah, exactly. It's not going away, right? You're not putting that genie back in the bottle.
That's it. That's it. And especially in this environment across the Indo-Pacific, businesses are doing it tough. Businesses, if they're not changing and adapting, they're withering on the vine, which is no good for anyone. And I guess the other thing here, speaking about the integration of human and machine, it really highlights the fact that machines aren't replacing humans; it's just making their lives easier, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's obviously different ways to implement it, and longer term, there will unfortunately be some jobs that are lost to AI, but that's been unfortunately constant throughout human history, right? But what it will free up is some of that amazing brain power that we still have, the creative side of things, the emotional connection side of things that humans are so good at. Free them up to do those sorts of things for an organization and realize the value there. So I think, again, it comes back to that change management, make sure that we're ready and we consider the human factors of any change we make in an organization, AI or otherwise, right? But certainly it will be transformative. I think the conversations, we might look back at this podcast in 25 years and think, geez, we were so immature back then, and the way it will change the organization and society as a whole, I think will be really quite profound.
It's like I grew up watching a cartoon called The Jetsons, and they used to have an automatic vacuum cleaner. And now they're everywhere, right? That's just,
Yeah.
what are you talking? And you look back and think, my God, it's like, did they predict this? It's unbelievable. Life has
What
really changed.
what really shocked me is there's a new robot vacuum and no joke, it has a little robot arm that'll pop out and pick up your socks and put them in the box for you. So they go back in there. This is getting a bit crazy.
I'm just wondering if it's going to iron and fold your socks. Is that the
Yes.
so mate? Let's touch on something that's I guess current and on it, on everyone's mind at the moment.
Mm.
So, give me an example of how this could work around tariffs, specifically around the Indo-Pacific. So the US, China, uh, Australia, Vietnam, Korea, Japan.
Mm.
The way that we are now about to do cross-border transactions is changing. How can uh, how do you think that blending the human and the machine can make a big difference here for businesses?
Yeah, it's certainly interesting times on that front. I I feel for a lot of businesses that are doing quite tough, trying to adapt to that. Right, there's again just this absolute fire hose of information, and you're trying to keep on top of this fire hose at the same time as running your business. And it's tough because, as we're seeing, a lot of these changes are fundamentally changing the viability of some businesses, right? Supply chains are massively disrupted. You can't source from certain countries if you're going to sell to other ones now. It just becomes an absolute nightmare. I think for them, if they could have a source of information, sorry, a source of intelligence that's delivered to them rather than just a stream of information, that would free up a lot more of their time to focus on, again, the running of the business and making sure they can adapt to these changes rather than just trying to understand what's changing. I think the distinction I make there is that information is just sort of that raw data. We can extract insight out of information using analysis, but then grounding that and making it contextual to the organization is where it becomes intelligence. I think that's where an organization is going to get the most value out of a solution in this space, is that if it can deliver the intelligence in the right format, in the right context for the organization, that's where they can go beyond just trying to understand what's going to happen, but to predict and actually prescribe what should happen in the organization to adapt to this rapidly changing environment, whatever that may be, tariffs or otherwise.
It is intelligence optimized.
Exactly. Exactly.
But you touch on a really interesting point there too, mate, because there are so many different points of data. And with that example, with tariffs, you've got policy, you've got government policy,
Mm.
you've got shipping rates, you've got, well, all the way back. You look at the beginning of a supply chain, especially raw materials, buying raw materials. How's that going to change? What the consumer's going to pay. How's that going to change how many people I need on the factory floor to assemble things? How could you do that without the assistance of AI?
I really don't know, other than throw people at the problem, which is
Mm.
obviously just not a financially viable solution for most companies.
No. And I guess also when you look at organizations and you look at change, you look back in history, with Apple, and their iPhone and their camera, and just, Kodak withering on the vine.
Mm.
Kodak had been around for a very, very long time. They were one of the world's biggest companies, and yet they weren't picking up the vibe, so to speak. They weren't reading the room, because they, either didn't have the data, or they thought that, their technology, open and close inverted commas, was superior, and people wouldn't change. People would just keep doing things because that's the way it's always been done. Imagine they had access to open source and human intelligence that helped them, refine their strategy. Strategies change. They're not there to be fixed. Just because you got a 5-year strategy, it doesn't mean it changes. It doesn't change, I should say. It doesn't mean it doesn't change.
No, exactly. I think at the very outset of this podcast, we spoke about the jobs to be done framework, and actually Kodak is one of the premier examples of a very poorly executed jobs to be done framework. Kodak fundamentally failed to realize that customers were not hiring a camera necessarily to capture a moment, but they were hiring these digital cameras because it filled a different set of jobs, which is around obviously the ease of use. You don't need to go and get the film developed and worry if you accidentally expose it. And I'm kind of showing my age. I don't know too much about film, but that's what I understand. And then The other big job was the immediate sharing you could get, which just opened up so many more social opportunities. So it wasn't necessarily that they were hiring it because the camera or the photos looked better. They were hiring digital cameras because it fulfilled the set of jobs that they actually wanted to understand. And so what Kodak really should have done, and as the famous cautionary tale goes, is they needed to understand why customers were using their product, and more importantly, why customers were still not using their product. And that's where, again, obviously this is 20, 30 years ago at this point, but understanding the breadth of human intelligence they probably had access to but weren't looking at could have fundamentally changed the course of their history.
Wow, if only.
Mm.
Funny stories like that too, I guess. Blockbuster and Netflix, and
Oh,
and you see it on a smaller scale as well. You see it in local cafes or restaurants who aren't utilising, aren't really reading the room. Whether it's changing a menu to understand what the consumers want versus where's the foot traffic coming from, and so on and so forth. It's just finger in the air, see which way the wind's blowing, and off you go. And you see it these days. They're closing or they're opening in the wrong spot. From you
yeah,
talk about small businesses, they're opening a restaurant that, good example of a business that's likely to go broke given the data that's available. A lot of restaurants and cafes don't last more than 12 months. And is that because, you're in the wrong spot? Is it, you're not liking the menu? If you had all that data and knew what to do with it and be able to analyze it. And I guess that's the good thing about AI, right? It's not just you and three people sitting around a room, over a glass of whiskey saying, we think this is what people like. You got access to AI that's got actual data on what people like from multiple viewpoints.
100%. I think we should do a whole other podcast on some of that segmentation and prediction work you can do in that space, because it's exactly that. There's a wealth of information that can inform almost every decision that needs to be made in a business, partly driven by your internal data, but I think, again, more importantly in this environment, the external information that's available to help make a better decision and ultimately drive the success of your business.
Wow, mate, let's do that, definitely. Well, mate, blending human and machine to craft strategy beyond the data set. It's been wonderful. You've provided some amazing insights and intelligence to I guess, hopefully our listeners, might make them sit up and think about, oh, geez, am I on the right path here? Do I need to call Curtis?
My pleasure.
Hey Curtis, thanks for joining us today, mate. As always, and every day when I see you, I get excited. I get goosebumps just being in the same room as you. Listening to what you have to say and how you help clients, it seriously is exceptional, mate. But it's great to be in your stable, mate. Have a great day, and we'll catch up again soon.
Sounds good, mate. Thanks for having me. I'll see you.